Before we even start, raise your hand if you grew up in a time when making plans meant actually calling someone's house phone and praying their parents didn't pick up. Yeah, this one's for you. Because here's the thing nobody's talking about in 2026. While everyone is obsessing over Gen Z and their TikTok dances, their aesthetic skincare routines, and their therapy speak captions, there's a whole generation sitting back in their recliners, sipping whatever they want, watching all of it go down, and thinking, man, we had it so much wilder than this. Gen X. The forgotten middle child of generations. Too young to be boomers, too old to be millennials. And honestly, completely unbothered by both. And today, we're going back. All the way back to the basements, the kegs, the cassette tapes, the unsupervised summers, the landlines, and the kind of bad decisions that nobody filmed because there were no cameras, but somehow everyone still heard about on Monday morning. Let's get into it. First, let's just set the scene. It's 1987, or maybe 1993. Doesn't matter. The details are interchangeable. What matters is this. It's a Friday night. You're 15, 16, maybe 17 years old. Your parents think you're at your friend's house. Your friend's parents think you're at your house. And absolutely nobody, not one single adult on this planet, knows where you actually are. You're in someone's basement. And that basement? That was everything. That was your TikTok, your Instagram, your Netflix, your group chat, and your therapy session all rolled into one dimly lit, wood-paneled, slightly damp room, with a pool table in the corner and a couch that had seen things it could never unsee. No algorithm picked your friend group for you. You just showed up. And it worked. Now I know what some of you younger folks watching this are thinking. You're thinking, okay, but that sounds kind of boring. No content, no filming it, no posting it. And that's exactly the point. When something wild happened in that basement, and wild things happened constantly, it lived in your memory, and your friend's memory, and that one kid who always showed up uninvited but somehow knew everything. The story got told at school on Monday. It got exaggerated a little by Tuesday. By Wednesday, it was practically a myth. By Friday, it was legend. That's how culture spread. Person to person. Word of mouth. No views, no likes. No algorithm pushing it to strangers in another country. Just chaos and trust and a little bit of mystery. Let's talk about the keg, because you cannot have this conversation without talking about the keg. The keg was not just a beverage container. The keg was a social institution. Getting the keg meant someone's older sibling was involved. Someone had to borrow a truck, someone lost a deposit, and someone definitely got grounded for a minimum of 2 weeks afterward. But none of that mattered in the moment. Because when that keg showed up at the party, and everybody heard it was happening through what can only be described as a supernatural teenage communication network that somehow worked without smartphones, the whole neighborhood just knew. Kids showed up from 3 blocks away. Kids you hadn't seen since elementary school. Kids you weren't sure actually went to your school. And everyone stood around that keg like it was a campfire. And they talked. Real talking. Face to face. Awkward silences and all. You had to actually figure out what to say next. You couldn't just send a meme. You couldn't just react with an emoji. You had to use your actual human mouth and construct sentences on the spot. Terrifying. Thrilling. Completely necessary for the development of a functioning personality. Here's something that'll genuinely blow your mind if you're under 30 right now. Gen X didn't have a way to look up the answer to anything. You want to know if a movie was good? You asked your friend. Your friend asked their cousin. Their cousin had strong opinions. You went with it. You want directions somewhere you've never been? Someone drew you a map on a piece of paper with a pen, and you followed it. And sometimes you got lost. And when you got lost, there was no GPS to bail you out, so you either figured it out or you pulled into a gas station and asked a stranger, in real life, with words. And you know what? Most of the time it worked out fine, because people were generally pretty decent about giving directions. And also because getting a little lost on the way to somewhere was actually part of the experience. Gen X has a tolerance for uncertainty that is genuinely unmatched, and it came from years of just figuring it out with no safety net. Can we talk about summer for a second? Because Gen X summers were something else entirely. Your parents sent you outside in the morning. That was it. That was the whole instruction. Go outside. No itinerary, no schedule, no organized activity, no check-ins. You came back when it got dark, or when you smelled dinner. Whichever came first. In between, anything could happen, and usually did. You built forts in the woods that definitely violated some kind of structural safety code. You rode your bike to places your parents would absolutely have not approved of if they'd known. You jumped off things you shouldn't have jumped off. You ate food from someone else's fridge without asking. You made decisions that, looking back now, as an adult, with actual responsibilities and a functioning prefrontal cortex, were genuinely questionable. But here's the thing, you survived. And more importantly, you learned. You learned what happened when you pushed too far. You learned how to read people. You learned how to get yourself out of situations that you yourself walked into. You learned independence not because someone taught it to you in a workshop, but because you were just out there, living it, every single day of every single summer. The music. Oh, we have to talk about the music. Gen X grew up with music that had an actual physical weight to it. You didn't stream a song, you waited for it on the radio. You sat there with your finger hovering over the record button on your cassette player, ready to capture it the second it started, praying the DJ wouldn't talk over the intro, and when you finally got a clean recording, that tape was sacred. You labeled it with a Sharpie. You carried it everywhere. You wore it out. Or you saved up your money, actual money you earned doing chores or babysitting or mowing lawns, and you bought the album at the record store. Not a download. Not a monthly subscription. You walked into a physical building. You flipped through actual records or cassettes, and you brought one home, like a prize. And then you listened to the whole thing, front to back, because that's how albums worked. You didn't shuffle, you didn't skip, you sat with it. Gen X has a relationship with music that is completely different from what came after. Because when music costs you time, and money, and effort, you actually pay attention to it. Now let's talk about something that doesn't get enough credit, the Gen X social skill set. Because growing up the way they did, without smartphones, without social media, without the ability to curate a version of yourself online and show only the highlight reel, Gen X got really, really good at something that's becoming genuinely rare. Reading the room. When your only option is to be physically present with other humans, you get good at it fast. You learn body language. You learn tone of voice. You learn when someone's actually fine and when I'm fine means the exact opposite. You learn how to crack a joke at the right moment and how to shut up at the wrong one. You learned how to be in a room with people who were different from you and figure out how to get along anyway. Not because someone told you to. Not because there were guidelines. But because that's just what you had to do when you were all stuck in the same basement. Let's be real for a minute though. Not everything about growing up Gen X was great. Some of it was genuinely hard. Mental health wasn't talked about the way it is now. If you were struggling, you were expected to push through it. Walk it off was real advice that real adults gave to real children dealing with real problems. Feelings were inconvenient. Vulnerability was weakness. You figured it out alone or you didn't figure it out at all. A lot of Gen X people carry stuff they never fully processed because there was no language for it, no space for it, no framework to even understand what was happening inside them. So when they see Gen Z talking openly about anxiety, about boundaries, about therapy, about mental health, yeah, some of them roll their eyes. But a lot of them, if you catch them in an honest moment, will quietly tell you that they wish they'd had that it would have helped. Gen X is complicated. They're tough because they had to be, and some of that toughness cost them something. Back to the fun, though, because the fun was real. The phone, the landline, the shared family phone that sat in the kitchen or the hallway and had a cord so short you basically had to stand still to use it. You wanted to call your friend? You called the house. Their mom picked up. You had to have an entire polite conversation with their mom before you even found out if your friend was home. And if they weren't home, you left a message, a verbal message, that their mom would or would not remember to pass along. It was a whole system, and if you wanted privacy on that call, you pulled the cord as far as it would go into the bathroom or the closet, and you whispered, which everyone in the house could still hear. But the social agreement was that you pretended you couldn't. Privacy in a Gen X household was more of a concept than a reality. You learned to communicate in code. You learned to use your words carefully, because literally anyone could be listening. Here's the thing about bad decisions, though, and this is important. Gen X bad decisions were largely unrecorded. That is a gift that they did not fully appreciate at the time, but absolutely appreciate now. The stuff that happened at those parties, the things that were said, the absolutely unhinged choices that were made on a random Tuesday night, gone. Unverifiable. Subject only to the fading and increasingly unreliable memories of the people who were there. Nobody screenshotted it, nobody clipped it, nobody posted it with a trending audio. It just happened. And then, it was over. And life went on. Can you even imagine? In 2026, every single moment of your life is potentially a piece of content. You go to a party, someone's filming. You say something dumb, someone's filming. You trip over your own feet in the parking lot of a Target, someone's filming. Gen X got to be young and stupid in the dark. And that darkness, well, it was protective. You could try things, fail at things, be embarrassingly yourself, and then grow past it, without a digital archive of your worst moments following you around forever. That's not nothing. That's actually enormous. Let's talk about how Gen X handled boredom. Because boredom used to be different. Boredom used to be a creative state. When there's nothing to do and no device to fill the space for you, you invent things to do. You write something. You draw something. You call a friend and make a plan. You pick up an instrument. You wander outside and see what's happening in the neighborhood. You start a project that has a 0% chance of succeeding, but you try it anyway because why not? Boredom was the engine of creativity for an entire generation. Gen X produced some of the most interesting art, music, film, and writing of the last 50 years. And a significant portion of it came from people who had nothing to do as kids and decided to make something out of that nothing. Grunge came from boredom. Alternative rock came from boredom. A lot of independent film came from boredom. Entire subcultures came from boredom. What are we producing when nobody is bored anymore? When every spare second gets filled with a scroll? That's a question worth sitting with. And now, here we are in 2026. Gen X is in their mid-40s to late 50s. Some of them have kids who are Gen Z. Some of them have kids who are already adults. They've watched the world go from rotary phones to smartphones to AI having full conversations with people. They lived through more technological change than any generation before them, and they adapted to all of it, because adapting to change is basically their core personality trait. But here's what they'll tell you, if you ask them. If you actually sit down with a Gen Xer and say, hey, what was it really like? They'll tell you that there was something about growing up the way they did that forged something in them. Not better, not worse, just different. A certain comfort with figuring things out on the fly. A certain ease with being bored. A certain lack of need for external validation. A certain ability to sit in a room full of people and actually be present in it. They didn't post their lives. They lived them. They didn't document their experiences for an audience. They had the experiences and then carried them around inside themselves like secrets. And those secrets? Those late-night basement conversations. Those bad decisions on empty roads. Those summers that felt like they would last forever. Those cassette tapes worn down to nothing. Those parties that the whole school was talking about by Monday. Those friendships formed through proximity and time and shared chaos rather than algorithm. Those secrets became the people they are. And whether you're Gen X yourself, nostalgic for an era you barely caught the tail end of, or just genuinely curious about what life looked like before a smartphone was in every pocket, I hope this took you somewhere real for a few minutes. Because honestly, there's something worth remembering here. Not to go backward, going backward is never the answer. But to remember that connection, community, creativity, and even chaos don't require a platform or a following or a notification. Sometimes all you need is a basement, some questionable choices, and people willing to show up. If this video hit different, if it made you laugh, made you think, or made you text your friend from 1994 who you haven't talked to in 2 years, hit that like button. It genuinely helps more than you know. And if you're new here, welcome. We do things a little differently on this channel. We talk about the stuff that actually matters. The real history of how people lived, who they were, and what made them that way. No fluff, no filler, just stories worth telling. So subscribe. Hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. Because we've got more coming. More generations, more eras, more... Wait, people actually lived like that? Energy. I'll see you in the next one. Don't do anything your parents wouldn't approve of. Actually, you know what? Do a little something they wouldn't approve of. Within reason. Gen X would want that for you.